Welcome. I'm Jessica Tejan, and this is the Evolving to Exceptional podcast, where we talk about reaching peak performance in our workplaces, homes, and communities so that we can live our best life possible, an exceptional life. All right, I am so excited to introduce our guest today, Rachel Boehm. Is that how you say your last name?
You nailed it.
Awesome, Rachel Boehm, and she is a workplace wellness, well-being, and wellness coach, and works on those types of programs. And I would love for you, Rachel, to just tell us a little bit more about who you are and what you do, and maybe just a little bit also about why you're passionate about what you do.
Yeah, and thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled. So I work with leaders of small, medium-sized organizations so that they can build organizations that people don't want to leave, right? Which is the goal. And there's many ways to access that, but the entry point for me is holistic well-being. So you might hear it called workplace wellness, but I look at the whole picture, and that's something maybe we can kind of talk about is what does that whole picture mean? So creating effective, compliant well-being programs to drive organizational change, be an employer of choice. And then I also coach one-on-one individuals. They are often single women in business, but don't have to be, to thrive personally and professionally at the same time. It actually is possible, but a lot of that comes from no longer shoulding on ourselves and overcoming imposter syndrome and setting proper work-life boundaries.
So I'm curious, starting with the term wellness, there's these terms of like wellness and well-being, and
Yeah.
struggled for years. I tell this story in my book where I struggled for years with the term well-being itself, and like what does it mean, and like I don't know how to achieve it, and a lot of that was just where I was at in my career. But I'm curious, when it comes to those terms, like what you mean by them, and yeah, what's kind of part of them.
Yeah, and it's such a great question because some people might see it as semantics, wellness, well-being, interchangeable, and they might use it as such. But others, and I find this more with my scholarly friends, we're deep nerding out in the
Yeah.
literature. We're saying that no, there's a difference between well-being and wellness, and wellness is almost this tangential thread, or well-being is the umbrella, right? And then you have like resilience and wellness and mental health and physical health and financial well-being or wellness and all of these other kind of subcategories that create someone's overall well-being. I think for the purposes of kind of the average consumer, tomato for now. I think if we as practitioners and researchers really want to stand on that hill, we should do a better job of communicating it with the people, what we mean by that. But I think for purposes of our conversation, at least for me, when I say it, I mean your whole self. I mean all 8 dimensions of wellness or well-being, your financial, your social, your spiritual, or your purpose, et cetera, et cetera. What makes you thrive and be excited about life? And there's a lot that goes to that.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is, at least, well, while I was in the workplace, was w- we and with that term, and the terms or the differentiation is what you're all focused on, right? So like with
Yeah.
wellness, I always felt like that was like health and wellness, right? So like so when we would talk about programs or things that we would do, it'd be kind of centered around that. Like, are we going to do something with yoga? Are we going to have, an incentive for taking walks, or working out or things like that, versus what you just described, which is much more holistic and includes a lot of different elements into it, that actually contributes to kind of your overall sense of how you're doing. So I think it's helpful when you actually take that broader perspective, and it brings a lot more value. What do you see as the most effective approach, or what you think workplaces should really be doing when it comes to well-being practices, or that holistic look at what's needed to support the individual.
I think there's always a rush, and individuals do this too, right? There's a rush to jump in and start something. I heard it described, I really wish I could take credit. I heard it described as random acts of wellness, right? So, oh, we need wellness. Let's have a walking challenge. Let's have a whatever
Yes.
challenge. Let's do this. Like, oh, some of the other company I read about on LinkedIn is doing this. We should do that without just stop for a second. What's already working? Like, no one ever asked that question. What are we already doing? What's game? How could we do more of it? That could be enough for now. But even just take us even a bigger step back. What is it you really want? Like, what do you, not you as the individual leader, but what is the organization trying to do? Because
Mhm.
your wellness program, wellness will be whatever, right? If your program needs to be aligned with the resource that you have, the goals that the organization have, it needs to include every employee. You know, you're not going to please everyone, but you need to be considerate of everyone. You know, the leaders, all of them need to be bought into this. And so aligning it first with the organization's strategy and culture, it's not the fun part for some people, and it feels
Right.
like a slower part because we want to just jump in and show we're doing something. But you won't be effective with the doing unless you know what and how and why you're doing it.
So maybe you could describe for us what that looks like. What does it look like to align, well-being around strategy and resources? Like, can you give us an example of an organization's, strategy and how you might then align that with, with what you're doing from a well-being standpoint?
Absolutely. So, I mean, some of the initial questions I would ask, even just in a consultation with a leader who's considering my kind of three-phase approach to building their program, is if you did nothing else this year, what do you want the wellness program to do? If there was only one thing, what would it be? And relate it, in a year from now, if you're, overhearing kind of the quote water cooler talk, right? Two
Mhm.
colleagues, two employees talk about the wellness program. What do you want them to be saying? Um, where is the organization going? Is another thing I mentioned. So, are you trying to be an employer of choice? Is your focus, are your metrics going to be recruitment and retention? Okay, does a yoga class, they're great, I'm not doing it, but just
Right,
it's
right,
you said it's a go-to, right? That and a step challenge and like healthy cafeteria food,
right,
right? or,
right.
or a
Yeah,
vending
those
machine,
are
right?
the like
It, those are
first
the
three
things,
steps. Yeah. Mhm.
right? Are those really going to be appealing? And if the answer is yes, okay, do people know about it? Right? Are the employees that are there using it? If not, do they know about it? Are they afraid to use it? Because your culture has for so long focused on FaceTime. So yes, you have it, but no one's using it because managers are still focused on measuring by FaceTime rather than output.
So I
So it's, yeah, and then just one other thing, sorry,
no.
because it's tied to that. Can you integrate? So every employer, right, has some type of evaluation or recognition or some sort of formula for that, some sort of structure for that. Put the wellness into it to incentivize people to take action, to make the leaders support it, so that it really ties everything together.
So I was jumping in there because
Yeah.
it related so much to kind of my past experience. So some of the story I talk about is so I was an executive leader over multiple operations functions, including talent management, or HR, IT, all those different functions. And so part of my job or my responsibilities was to look at our practices and and how could we focus on it and do a better job and all those things. And yet I ultimately, ended up burning out and, experiencing, such extreme stress that I had to it took me a year probably to recover from that burnout. And it made me think about that challenge that you're talking about with the culture. So you can have one of the things we did was we had as needed time off, so you could take time off whenever you needed to for personal time. We still had vacation, but so you could take time off if you were sick, and it was one of our best benefits, and it was great. And there was an expectation that you would still then get your work done. So you would take that time off, but you would still meet performance expectations and results and be a professional and all those things. And one of the things looking back now, I think it really speaks to that challenge is that if the culture is high performance, our values one of our values was driven, so like driven to work hard, get a lot done, do a lot, then taking time to really like recover and not, working extra later, wasn't part of the culture. So those behaviors, how often do you see that as one of the big hurdles when it comes to um implementing practices?
All the time. I mean, when you were sharing that, and first, I just so appreciate, as also a listener, how open you are about your experiences, because that's how we can learn.
Yeah,
It's not just from the science and the best practices, but what have we experienced that makes us so passionate about this work. Um, we, as for instance, we were talking about putting this into the structure, and then also you mentioned the ability to feel like you can even take the time off when it's afforded to you. If somebody doesn't have a backup at work, right? Somebody that they can say, here, for like one day, take care of this.
right,
They're not going to take a minute. They're not going to take a real mental health day, or if they do, they're not actually going to be off. I think one of my personal experiences with this was, I have the out of office, email on there, and I would try so nicely to say, just like, don't email me. like
right,
you see it's there if you're internal. I'm out. Don't email me, right? But okay, you did whatever. Um, I've said while I'm gone, I don't have access to this. Please email this person for this or this person for this. But I come back to like 20 million, I'm being dramatic, but like
right,
all of these CCs that essentially say she'll handle it when she's back. Well, then what's the point of having the backup if you're not going to take care of it? You're just going to kick it until I'm back. So really being aware of like, you've designated a backup, but are they actually serving as a backup? What are the expectations for that relationship when somebody is out? If I'm designating you as a backup, I trust you to handle the project. And you can catch me up when you're done. I don't need 20 CCs on the same email.
yeah.
It
Well,
just,
email's a
uh,
pet peeve of mine. I think most people use it ineffectively,
mm.
especially within organizations when it comes to um how they're emailing and how they're using it. So what kinds of practices, so once you've got kind of alignment on the organization, what types of programs or practices are you bringing into the workplace? Like what do you bring in that really makes a difference?
So, I mean, it can be. I don't want to completely knock, and we shouldn't look at the cafeteria, the vending machine, if people are
Right.
still having cafeterias. Those are great. You can do them effectively. I would say just two quick things on that before I give other examples that aren't often thought about. Step challenges are kind of the quick go-to, but I would also be mindful of your ADA policies and maybe call it a movement challenge, because not everybody can step, not everybody wants to. Some people are cycling, they want to feel a part of this challenge, but they're cyclists, they love that. You're gonna get emails, why can't this count? So maybe like movement minutes or something. um, Biggest Loser challenges. It's a catchy phrase because of the show, but not everybody needs or wants to lose weight, and that's kind of where you draw the line of what is the real job of the employer. So healthy habits challenge might be better. Um, Other things are around, to your point about email. Your email is not your to-do list. So how are you using emails and meetings effectively? Having those questions are actually a wellness, can be part of a wellness
Mhm.
program. You know, do your meetings always run long? Do people have a break to even go to the bathroom between them? What if you set the meeting to where the break was at the front end, right? So human behavior, we're going to go, oh, we have 10 more minutes. Let's just finish this up, right? If you started the meeting like 2:10 and went to 3 o'clock, you're more likely to come out with a 10 break than if you start at like 2 o'clock and try to go to 2:50.
Mhm. Mhm.
Just little things like that can actually make a big difference. So we look at the operations, we look at kind of the daily life of the organization, as well as some of the more common, oh, it's health and wellness, it's nutrition and exercise.
So it's interesting as you talk about that. Well, one of my running jokes is like to be an effective leader, I had to learn how to hold it all day so I could make it through all those meetings and actually not have to go to the bathroom. And then when I became a mom and was having to pump, it was a real problem because
Yeah,
you could absolutely not pump and go to the bathroom in a given break. That was like not even feasible. So but I think you know what's interesting or what I think of when I think of my own journey and my own struggle with stress is I'm not sure I was really aware of how much my well-being was negatively impacted. I'm not sure I had a way to tell um as it was building up. I always talk about my burnout experience as it being like a slow burn where it wasn't like there was some massive explosion and I imploded all of a sudden and everything was terrible. It was more like slowly over time I was just worn down until all of a sudden I was like, oh my gosh, the whole forest burned down. And when that happened, like I didn't realize what was happening while it was happening. And I guess I wonder, about people if there's ways for people to be able to tell how are they really doing? How are they really managing and coping with the stresses of life, including the stresses of the workplace that would, more so than just are you health at a healthy weight or are you, even Biggest Loser, statistically most of the people that even go on Biggest Loser end up gaining much if not all of the weight back if you go and look at it. So it's like, are those really impacting people long term? Are they really impacting the energy in the organization, the overall performance of people, and trying to understand how are people really doing? What is it that they really need? And even for them to be aware of that need.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's so much good stuff that you just shared. I mean, the few things that come to mind, the first being, James Clear says, we might, many of us at least, be familiar with the concept of the invisible hand, right, from economics. And the environment is like the invisible hand when it comes to behavior. And that's why I'm obsessed with creating for my clients, organizations or individuals, systems for success, right? How what the air quality of your environment is affects what you do and how you do it. The lighting, the colors, right? There's a reason fast food restaurants have red and not soothing colors, right? Red actually can, I mean, there's some debate on this, but there's a lot of synergy there. Like red boosts them or increases your metabolism and your blood pressure, whereas green and blue are soothing. So these typically in healthcare and wellness programs. So all of these little things to create the environment. Um, and the reason I mention that is because as soon as, like anything, awareness is the first step. So even if you're learning about this, not realizing it's for you, it's for a friend, you might start observing how, oh, I'm actually exposed to a lot of these things. I wonder if they're affecting me. Well, let's treat it like an experiment. Let's have some fun with it. What if I made some changes? Oh no, that didn't work out. Okay, maybe this. Oh wow, I feel so much better. I didn't even realize my shoulders were to my earlobes.
Mm.
Um, just the more you learn, just question, like, would that be beneficial for me? Would it not? Am I noticing these things in myself? But to your point, a fish doesn't know about water until it's out of it, is kind of that saying, right? So, in addition to just learning about some of these concepts and ways other things might hit you and experimenting with that, if you start to notice disturbances in your sleep, that can be an early warning sign that you're very stressed on the way to burnout. And burnout isn't just stress and exhaustion. It's threes, it's cynicism, it's lack of self-efficacy. So when you hit all three for an extended period of time at once, that's when you are technically in burnout. But it is that stress continuum, right? So if you notice that you've been stressed for a really long time, take a step back, check yourself. If you feel like you're not sleeping very well, if you're starting to doubt yourself, right? Constant imposter syndrome, check yourself. If you observe that in a friend, they're constantly shooting on themselves, they're beating themselves up, I'm no longer good at this, they're questioning why they're even at the organization. All of those are warning signs that there's something going on and they are probably on their way to hitting burnout. And the goal is, of course, to stamp that out.
Yeah, well, and I think your analogy of the fish out of water is really a powerful one, especially in a world where we're almost constantly inundated with stress. When you made the comment about like identifying if you're under stress a lot, my reaction was like, well, like when was I not?
Right.
For years, I was actually under stress for so long. I didn't know a life of not being in a
Yeah.
stress hyper sympathetic nervous system type of state. I didn't even know those terms at the time to understand the difference. Despite having an extensive education, I went to law school, got my Juris Doctorate, and I kind of joke that I started operating in a place of stress in law school and then just never stopped. Like
Yeah.
just that was just normal. That was just how you live. And I think that's probably the case for a good amount of people out there, that they've just lived in a hyper stressed, pressures at work, pressures at home. You've got kids, you got family, you got, whatever is happening in your life, somebody with an illness, your own health challenges, whatever's going on. And the stresses kind of don't stop. And so, when I talk about burnout, I talk about that there's kind of 3 key elements. I'm curious to get your thoughts on this. I talk about there's 3 key elements. One is, our environment, the where we are, the culture, the experiences we're having, what's happening in that place, our own individual limiting beliefs that are our fears that are contributing to our continuing to push beyond reasonable limits. And then there's just those crises, like the things that just happen, that we actually can't do anything about, like global pandemics and someone getting sick, or those things that just occur in our lives. And so because we can't do anything about the crises, then we have to really address the other two areas, or the other two elements that we actually can do something about. And so it makes me think, like, with that level of not being able to necessarily see it, not necessarily being able to recognize stress. How do you help people start to recognize the difference,
Yeah.
that what they need to do to actually shift?
Well, I think there's a couple of things that are important to make distinctions about. The first is that there's a difference between stressors and stress response.
Yeah.
Just like there's good stress and there's I hate good and bad because that gets into like an existential conversation. But there's helpful stress and there's unhelpful stress, right? Helpful stress is, oh my god, I'm going to be giving a talk. But that's, if you use it correctly, if you channel it correctly, that's going to drive you to excel, right? Or it could be this anxiety inducing, oh my God, I don't want to do this, I'm terrified, right?
Mhm.
And your body doesn't actually know the difference. It just knows stressor and it's going to respond. It's your mind that's giving it the judgment. So it's a great TED talk on making friends with stress that I encourage everyone to check out. And I love the researcher. I'm blanking on her name right now. So that's something. The terms of stress versus stressors that's related, right? The stressor could be gone, but if you don't like finish that stress response, if you don't get
Right.
it out of you, you're just there, still in it. And there's another great analogy that I use. You know, when you squeeze a lemon, you get lemonade, lemon juice. When you squeeze an orange, you get orange juice. Like whatever you squeeze, you're gonna get that out of it. And so if I squeeze like pretty much almost any human, any adult in the 21st century, stress juice is gonna come out of them. So if you're
Right.
listening to this, most likely we're talking to you, even if you don't realize it.
Yeah.
And so that's where that experimentation comes in. You know, if you don't want to, I'll phrase it a different way because I think sometimes if you're not at the point of awareness, I said to you, if you don't want to like have the negative effects of stress, you know, I'm going to lose you because you already are thinking, well, I'm not stressed. I won't have that anyways. So let me phrase it differently. If you want to live your best life, do your best work, have even more energy and focus, right? Um, the then explore some of these common interventions, for lack of a better word, these tactics, like improving your sleep, taking a 1 minute breathing exercise,
Mm.
you know, working out, et cetera, et cetera. Because that, whether or not you think you need it because you're stressed or because you want personal excellence, I don't care. Just do it and realize that you probably weren't doing it before, and you're going to have all of these positive benefits.
So I wonder if I like what you said there, and I wonder if a way to talk about it is actually to say that it's inevitable. You're facing stressors, right? There are
Right.
stressors in your life. And whether you feel stressed or not, your body is reacting in some way to that, to those stressors. Like there are triggers there. And whether you're effectively completing that stress response and bringing yourself back into balance and doing those things or not is going to determine, I think, the well-being element, right? So
Yes. Yeah.
instead of so instead of saying like it's a yes or a no, am I stressed or am I not, it's a we're all facing stressors all the time. Am I responding to those stressors in the most effective ways and implementing practices to help me reduce the effect or to minimize the negative effects of those stressors while capitalizing on the positive effects?
Yes, a great visual. I'm super into analogies. Anyone that knows me can tell you that. Sometimes they don't work, so hopefully this does. But I don't play tennis, but anybody who is aware of tennis is probably aware of the automated ball throwers things.
Yep.
Clearly, I'm not a tennis aficionado, but think about it this way. You're standing on the court and somebody has turned that thing on. Are you being pelted by all the balls coming at you? Or are you able to respond and hit them back? Right. So that is, how are you going to respond to stress? They're going to come at you no matter what. Are you going to be pelted by them, or are you able to kind of, at least for the most part, keep up and hit them back? And which
Mhm.
would you rather be? So
Mhm.
all of these things that we're talking about are going to help you hit back.
Yeah, and I just to add on to that, I love that analogy and standing there and being really strong and being able to just take it is not a good strategy.
So you're going to get
Speaking
welted
from
like
some personal
paintball.
experience. Yeah, just
Yeah,
being like,
yeah.
"I can handle this," is eventually you won't be able to.
Right. Yeah. You're not a stoic wall when tennis balls are flying in your face.
Yeah, yeah, it doesn't work. I think something else you said that was interesting to me was around, those strategies, then of what you can do and what you can apply. And you talked about breathing. And in my more recent experience, the power of breathing, I overlooked that for most of my life. Can you speak a little bit to that of just how simple a technique like that can make a difference?
Yes, and I overlooked it too. You know, when I first started looking at this, I am originally from kind of a health fitness perspective, and so um, I was like, oh yeah, whatever. Meh. And I don't want to be too woo woo. Just be woo woo. It's great. Breathing is the way that we can kind of control our nervous system,
Mhm.
right? When you when the exhale is slower than the inhale, and this is, as also a researcher, I have to say what we know so far, based on what we've learned so far. When the exhale is slower than the inhale, it it takes you into kind of the rest and digest mode, right? You could also use it, say you need an afternoon pick me up, right? But then hitting more caffeine, which is going to affect your sleep, which is going to affect your cravings, and so on. And maybe you can't like up the stairs quickly and just kind of get your heart rate going that way. You could use breathing. You could do a rapid inhale exhale, and that will kind of perk you back up. um, there are so many different types for so many different things, for focus, for energy, for calming, for like kind of emergency 101, or SOS. You could do it for a minute. And a lot of the research shows that even just a minute has the benefits. There's another one I'm exploring right now called the cyclic sigh. And I learned about it from the Huberman podcast. So I definitely plug, he has, Dr. Huberman has done a few podcast episodes really in depth, like 2 to 4 hours on some of these protocols. So definitely want to reference that. The cyclic sigh, yes, if you did it for 5 minutes every day, certainly benefits, but even just doing it 1 minute a day, building up to that, it allows you to have all of these benefits. Um, and it's going to make you more aware of when you start to enter the negative stress cycle and help you get back out of it. So it's
Yeah.
going to improve your awareness. And as somebody who also turned a nose at it for a while, I cannot stress enough how important it is to just give yourself permission to explore some of these.
Yeah, if I were to go back, if there were one thing I would advise a workplace to do, it would
Yeah.
be to implement some balanced breathing, like, just 6 in, 6 out, whatever, for 2 to 3 minutes. 3 minutes sets you up for, like, 8 hours or something like that,
Yeah.
before you make any big decisions, before you go get
Yes.
into any major conversations, like, take that step. One of my favorite stories is, so as I learned this, and I agree with you, it's so powerful, and I was a skeptic. So I've got little kids. I've got a 6-year-old son and twin 3-year-old girls. And there was one day where, like, they were just all melting down, losing their
Mhm.
minds. And I said, okay, pause. We're not doing anything until everybody in the family, mommy, daddy, everybody included, breathes for 3 minutes. I was
Yeah.
like, "We're not doing anything. No, we're not going anywhere, not playing anything." So everybody had to sit and everybody breathed. And it shifted everybody. When we were done, everybody was calmer. We could talk now, we could move forward. And it's only 3 minutes, right? It's like it's a minuscule amount of time. So yeah, I agree. Just that simple technique is so, so powerful.
Well, especially if you think, somebody might say, "I don't have 3 minutes. I got to get this out now." And I would argue a couple of things. The first is, just like in personal romantic relationships, the work on like, are you a stonewaller versus a communicate? No relationship benefits from stonewalling. Number one. So if you are just firing out these responses, you've probably misread the email, you've injected a tone, you don't know, you're not aware of how it's hitting you, it could be misinterpreting, and then that can lead to a cascade, which can lead to kind of stonewalling, right? So you don't have time for that in your organization. You do have time to fit in 3 minutes, 1 minute of breathing, um, to make sure that you're reading it correctly. The other thing is, or making any decision, from a clear mind, and not whatever state it's hit the first, uh, kind of that first prompt is hitting you. The other thing is, Viktor Frankl said, between stimulus and response, there's freedom, right? There's that choice. So meditation, mindfulness, breathing, all of these help you recognize when you can take a moment. You don't actually have to respond right away.
Right.
You really don't. You can take a minute. Worst case scenario, they're going to think you're super busy and popular, which is just a benefit for people in business.
Yes. 100%. So I'm curious, how do you get employees to actually use the techniques, the strategies, the well-being elements or wellness elements that you bring in? How do you get them to actually do those things? You just talked about like the resistance to potentially like doing the breathing, we're busy. How do you for all the different things you kind of bring in or suggestions you have, how do you get people doing them?
Well, there's typically, I mean, so thank you for asking that because I think the biggest thing is people have to have patience, right? So just because you've announced it and you're excited, you throw the money at this, you need to give it time to really catch on and spiral, especially if the organization is really large. The other thing is, again, you're not going to hit every single person with every single offering, which is why you want to have a holistic approach. Often the biggest hurdle is marketing. People don't know it's there. The next thing is, if they know it's there, do they feel comfortable using it? So have leaders talk about how they are using, like, oh, I did this amazing lunch and learn. Have them email their team and say, hey, next Wednesday, we're doing a Zoom on X, Y, and Z. I'm going to be there. I hope you will join me. Right? You don't have to make it mandatory because that's going to not give you the effects you want. But having them lead by example, right? I have emergency backup care and I used it because I had to get to a meeting, but my kid was sick. I couldn't cancel. Thank goodness we have this benefit. I use it too. I empower you all to take advantage of it. EAP program. So creating an environment where people know about it, where they feel comfortable using it, and giving permission for it to catch on is going to be huge.
Yeah, well, in EAP programs, I mean, so I've used it. I used ours and I encouraged
Yeah,
use,
I used it.
but but use was always really low. It was really
Yeah.
hard to get people um and one of the things I think is even with like if they needed support or coaching, I think that was probably the most common was to get a therapist or some type of support that way. It because it was only a couple of sessions. I think most people would be like, well, it's going to end anyway. It's not worth
Right.
getting started because I don't, can't pay for it beyond that or whatever.
Right.
How do you get people to either learn about those elements or and I guess maybe my question is more about and I like some of the things you talked about, but integrating, how do you integrate this so that it's not just another thing over here,
Mhm.
but it's like in their lives, it's what they're doing every day.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of it is going to depend on the organization, to be quite honest with you, right? Like, what is the current culture? I think two things to keep in mind that I can speak to at a broad level for your question. First is, I personally don't think it's the employer's job to make the employees care about their health.
Mhm.
We already care. I have never not cared about my health. I may have not realized the way all different things were intertwined. I'm stressed out or I have imposter syndrome, which means I'm not, going after promotions, which affects my financial well-being, which affects, et cetera. I'm, single in the workplace, so I'm constantly picking up the slack, which is why I'm single because I'm stuck in the workplace and I'm swiping online and trying to find a date to find a family to have work-life balance or whatever. Right? You don't always realize the way these intertwine. Um, I started to go down a rabbit hole on that, so sorry. But to pull back to your question, um, in terms of marketing, so the employees already care. It's not your job to make them care. It's your job to facilitate the way in which they show care. Um, the other piece is going back to that marketing. You know, I am so guilty of this too, and I'm working really hard to change it. We talk about like burnout prevention, stress management, healthy have broccoli and whatever, cauliflower rice. Like, okay, well, if you're really bought into that, that sounds great. If you haven't, it doesn't sound so great. So, advice that was given to a group of us a long time, earlier this year was we need to take kind of marketing lessons from like the fast food places, like the energy, like Red Bull gives you wings, right? Like that's a great catchy phrase. Like who wouldn't want to have wings? I'm gonna go drink a Red Bull. So how can we use some of these marketing tips and tools and tap into somebody's desire for growth rather than the desire to prevent negatives? And
Mm.
if you can find ways to do that, I imagine your program will catch on. The buy-in will be better. And then the final piece is going back to systems in the environment. It doesn't always have to be these huge programs. It could be as simple as how do we restructure the office environment to make it more conducive? You know, just like an individual can rearrange their kitchen so like the unhealthy stuff is in the top shelf and the healthy stuff is front and center. Little tweaks to the environment can add up to big changes. So just being open to experimenting with these tweaks will help make it a daily routine.
So let's you brought up the singles in the workplace, and I know that that's a passion of yours and something that's been
Yeah,
a hot topic lately. And I know from my own family experience, I have a sister who's single, and so she has this tendency to push harder to pick up more of the workload, because quote unquote she can, right? She like I've got 3 small kids. Like when I have to pick them up, I have to pick them up.
right.
The daycare's closing. Like there's no choice. My kids coming home on the bus, somebody has to be there, right? Like there is
Yeah.
literally no choice. But for somebody who's single, there's a little bit more choice in that. But there's I would imagine, pretty significant consequences of that. My sister's an engineer. She's a leader in a technology space, and she burns out,
Yeah.
from having to push so hard. Tell us a little bit about that the coaching you do that supports single women in their pursuit of trying to find well-being and balance.
Did you see the movie While You Were Sleeping? This is a throwback. With Sandra Bullock. So totally not the point of the movie, but leave it to me to help, like harp on this part. In the very beginning, her boss is like, "Hey, I have a question." She's like, "I'm not working Christmas," and he says, "But you're the only one without family." And she's like, and the next thing is she's working Christmas, right? That is an example of some of the things that we see where it's assumed that because you as a single person, male or female, don't have the quote nuclear family, right, that you don't have a life outside of work, and that is so not true. A question that's been posed in some of these conversations is why, if somebody wants to take off, go see their kid's soccer game, great, that's immediately considered, maybe not for every organization, but for some organizations that are more advanced in this work-life balance conversation, that's seen as okay. But if a single person wants to take off the same hour early to go train for a marathon or an Ironman or something that they're doing, they would probably never have the coach to even ask for that, or they might guise it under, a doctor's appointment
Right.
because it's seen as something selfish. It's for them, not for someone else. It's not as valid.
Mhm.
And the question is, either way, it's an hour out of that person's work time. Why is it not any less valid? That comes down to kind of moral judgments that we're making and this idea in society that everybody, if you're not already partnered, you just haven't found your person yet. Something might be wrong with you. You're here to pick up the slack until you have those external demands. In which case, work life balance is still a problem, but looks different.
Well, and I think you make a good point in that. I think that is a paradigm, right? And I probably was guilty of speaking to this in my early career of that. In your 20s, if you don't have kids, you don't have family, like that's when to put in those extra hours. That's
Mhm.
when to push extra hard. Like you have the bandwidth to do it. You can do it. For a lot of people, that eventually you do want a family, so you may not be able to do it at some point. And so there's this like stigma that that's generally the path people are, quote
Right.
unquote supposed to take, right? I, do this, and then I find a person and we get married and we have kids, and that's like the and I think your point in that there's a shift there, that there is a group of people who either intentionally, or unintentionally are not um walking that path, or certainly not doing it for the sake of it. I think that's
Mhm.
part of it too, is that it's not as though some of these people, in single individuals couldn't be married. Like there's plenty of divorces out there that say that you can get married and it not work, but they're waiting for that, or they're choosing, or even choosing a life not to get married and have children. There are definitely, I can see benefits to that. Maybe I'm a little jaded right now with small kids, but so I think there's a paradigm shift for leaders and for people that only think in one way, to really intentionally consider that bias towards families versus seeing the world through a singles perspective.
Yeah, I mean, so work life, and I have to say, I really hate the term work balance. I've used it because everybody knows it, but it's all life. It's work and non-work. It's personal, professional, right? So when I'm saying work life balance, please know I'm just choosing not to die on that hill today. But work life balance is not synonymous with family friendly.
Mhm.
So if you're in charge of that organization, ask yourself: does the policy reflect that it's not synonymous, or are you treating like they're the same? There's a push for benefit programs to be a little bit more cafeteria or buffet style rather than an all-in-one. So, for example, okay, you're a single employee, they don't benefit from dependents having health insurance because they don't have dependents. How else might you make that equitable? So it's not that one is better than the other, it's just different but equitable. Um, the other thing, you mentioned a huge benefit for leaders to look at their policies. There's also a benefit for businesses to consider their products and services
Mm.
because there's a growing population of singles by choice or otherwise, right? No kids by choice or otherwise. And they don't benefit from the buy one, get one specials or the Costco size whatevers. They don't benefit from single family housing. So what are if you want to serve and to grow your market share, look at that's another reason to look at this population and see how you create products and services for them too.
Yeah, and I love the idea of challenging our paradigms and our biases, and looking at that segment. And I think what you talked about, work life balance, and I share your dislike of, or distaste for that term. And I where I've navigated to with that is a lot more of this language around how do we balance our beings, how do we balance
Mm,
who we are and how we show up and what we are as a being, as a living, being that changes from day to day, that reacts differently in different environments, that has unique and different personality and character traits, and all of that creates that uniqueness, that kind of a la carte, or buffet style, can really benefit so much, I think, so much better than than the very specific, specifically defined programs, or benefits, or things like that,
right.
that make it more difficult to build in that flexibility.
Yes, I love that, the balanced being. I really love that term.
So I so appreciate you being here, Rachel. This is a great conversation. Is there anything you want to share with our listeners, or anything else you want to tell them about before we go?
I think just the biggest takeaway is try to avoid random acts of wellness if nothing else. Take, even if it's for you, not just your organization, take a second to just think about, where do you really want to go, and what are you doing now that's working, and how can you do more of that?
I love that. I think that's a great suggestion. If people want to get in touch with you, if there are workplaces who want to focus on some of these practices, where can they reach out to you? Where can they find you?
Yeah, best place to go to my website. It's Rach Boehm, so BOBHM, rachboehm.com, and all of the contacts are right there.
Well, fantastic. Rachel, you've added so much value and I just absolutely love the topic. Thank you so much for coming on today. It was absolutely great having you.
Thank you, Jessica. I really appreciate the opportunity. It was really fun.